Hey everyone, welcome to part two. So in part one, we created the app registration, and then we added the appropriate permissions to the API, and then authorized those permissions in our customer tenants. So next step now is to create the Power Virtual Agent, and for that we need to do that in Teams in the partner tenant. So let's open a web page where we're at, signed in. So let's go over to teams.com. So we'll just do it in the web browser version because my local client is connected to my corporate account. Okay, so we are signed into Teams. I'm just checking my account. Yes. So what we want to do first of all is create a new team where we'll have this bot reside in. So remind myself how to create a new team. Create team. Do it from scratch. Keep it private for now, and we will give it a unique name. So MDE recording. Great. Okie dokie. So now we've got our team. And next we need to add Power Virtual Agent. So we add it from the list here. Can I see it there yet? Nope. So we can start typing in search. And we then add that. So we're going to create a chatbot. I'm going to assign it to this team that we just created. So it's just going to go away and create that. Okay, ready. So I'm going to give it a name. So I'll give it MDE. So let's use a test user. I'm going to use test user 83. Language US. Fine. Great. Okay, so now our bot's been created. We need to just set the security. And just allow everyone in my organization, or everyone on my team, so everyone that I add as a member of that team can access it. Okay, now we just want to publish it. Okay, what's been published? So now let's start adding what we call topics. So topics are essentially when you can give phrases to the bot to allow it to do something or trigger something. So we create a new topic. name, and then we need some trigger phrases. So let's just say defender for endpoint customer score status. Well, let's just say customer status, probably better. Add that in. There we go. We got our first trigger phrase. Can add additional ones, but let's just save that. Once it's saved, now we can go to the authoring canvas to build out the logic. So what happens after we input this phrase into the chat? What does the bot do? So let's just start from scratch here. And then first set we want to do is ask a question. And then multiple choices. So first option would be TDM score, and the second option would be high severity alerts. Okay, so essentially we have two branches now. So we just want to give this variable a name. So let's give it answer as the name. And that gets passed through here. Save. Important to save it as often as possible as well. You never know what can happen and you don't want to lose any progress. So you can do a quick test as well if you wanted to. So if we put in our trigger phrase here and put it in the test window, you can see that it goes through the flow. So you are presented with the question, what would you like to know? And then TVM score, high severity alerts, and then whichever one you click through, it goes through the process. Obviously we haven't written anything yet, so it will bomb out. But if you wanted to, you can add in additional pieces here. So you can maybe show a message, say, hi there. Save. And then copy and paste the text. And you can see here the message has been added, so you can customize this as much as you want. Okay, so let's just focus on the score piece first. So let's add in a message. Just say anything really. So let me get that for you. And save. And then the next one here is we're going to call a flow now. Create a flow. And then we're presented with basically some template, but in this one it's going to be a Power Virtual Agent flow template we're going to use. Get started. Okay, so now we arrive at our flow editor. We can give it a name. This keeps it unique so we can see it when if we ever want to come back and edit later. Okay, so to begin with, we need to declare some variables, but what we see here is we have the way in which we come into this flow and the way we come out of this flow. So essentially when we get to that stage in the chatbot and it triggers this flow then, and then we want to return something back to the flow, and we'll define all of those variables here. So first of all, we want to add an action, and we want to be initializing a variable. So variable and initialize variable, and our first one's going to be just an integer, so essentially this will be a count of alert, so count will be count, and it's going to be an integer, and initial value is 0. Okay. So now let's create another variable. This one's going to be the response, so response text. This one will be string, and we'll just keep initial value blank. So we'll use that one later when we want to return something back. And then we want to do finally another variable, and this one's going to be an array. We want to call customer tenant ID. So this is where we will store, hard code our customer tenant ID. So in ours, we've got 3 customers, so we'll store the tenant IDs for those 3 customers within this array. So an array, and then within the value, we can paste our information in JSON format. So we've pre-made this for you, so just copy and paste this directly from the documentation. Boom, in there. So what we can see here is we've got Contoso, and we've got the tenant ID for Contoso, tenant ID for Tailspin Toys, tenant ID for Northwind Traders, and this is in JSON format. Okay. I think we also note in the documentation that you probably wouldn't do this in real world. You'd probably store it in a separate database for security and compliance reasons, but this is just a lab, so just doing this to show the power of the agent. Okay, just save that, and we want to so next we need to essentially apply a loop. So we're going to loop through this array, so essentially treat one customer at a time. So add an action, apply to each. And we want the customer ID array. I say within that loop then, we're going to use the parse JSON command, so we can essentially use the components of the array, so splitting out either it's going to be the tenant ID part or the customer name, because if you remember when we copied and pasted that JSON format, it was basically an array of 2 values for each bit. It was the tenant ID and the customer name, so we want to basically be able to use those pieces individually, so that's where we use the parse JSON operation. and content will be essentially the current item, which is the current entry in that array. Usually at the bottom there. And then in the schema, I think we've already got this here, which we've generated, so we can just pull this in. So this allows us to decipher that JSON. Boom. So typically you can do this. To generate this, you would click on this generate from sample, and you would actually have to run a test of your flow. So essentially you run the test and then you have an output from probably maybe when you initialize that variable, there'll be an output there, and you copy and paste that output then into the generate from sample, which essentially then pumps out this piece of text here, which we've already done in this instance. I'll maybe show you a bit of an example of that later, how we do that, but that's how we come up with this, the body of this JSON or this schema essentially. So once we've done that, we're actually able to use the components of the tenant ID array to be able to it's our next bit, which is to get an auth token. So in this one we're using the HTTP premium connector. This one here. So this is where we need to start using that information. So we actually do, this is a post command, and the URI is the logon.microsoftonline.1. So just pull this in here from the documentation. Boom. And in the middle we want our TID. So remember, not this one, not the customer TID, because that contains basically two elements. That contains both the tenant ID but also the customer name. We actually want this bit from the parse JSON output, the TID. So this is, see here, where we're able to split out those components of the array. And then we can just simply copy and paste the rest of the line, which is the award fee 2, etc. Okay, so make sure there's no spaces in between here. Okay, and then we need to set some information in terms of what type of request this is. So in here we need headers, we need content type. And you can use an app called Postman to test this out beforehand if you want to do it for yourselves. And you just grab this. So this basically tells this request what format our body is going to be in, and we're using the URL encoded, and now we want to copy and paste the body, and we want to replace some items here. So in here we use our specific client ID and our app secret, so I'm just going to go and grab those now. So just pull these from Notepad, so client ID, top, in there, and then secret. Yeah. Okay, and that now gives us should provide us with an auth token. So we can do a test now, but we need to do one more thing. We need to have pass the answer back. So we need to get first of all we need to set the initial variable. So we have answer and answer here. And then we save. Save. And we can close. So now we just want to call this flow here. So on here, call an action, and we have our flow here that we can call, that we've created. Boom. And then we can select the answer variable there. Okay, so now we can test this. Save it first. Get my trigger phrase. Paste that in there. Start the flow. TVM score. Okay, so everything's completed successfully, but what have we done? So we essentially triggered that flow to take place. So now we need to take a look at that flow. So we go back into the flow details. And we can have a look at this test run. So test run succeeded. And if we click into here, we can have a look at that test run in terms of the details. So if we expand out the loop and expand out this HTTP request, what we should have got is an auth token as the output. And you can see here we did. Got an access token here, and there's an expiry, etc. But this is essentially what we needed. And this is the access token, auth token, that we now can use to pull the Defender for Endpoint information out. So what we want to do first of all though is copy and paste the content of this body, because we'll use it a little bit later. So if we take all of this, because we'll be wanting this access token. So annoyingly, when you select it in here, you can't do the right click, but if you do Control C, you can do that and then bring up your notepad and get it in there. Okay, and you can see here that it runs through this array. So if we click next, you'll see that we got a different auth token. You see it probably ends slightly differently. Yeah. And same again for the third one. So that's essentially getting auth tokens across all three tenants. You can see here the customer tenant ID has been populated. Okay, there you go. Okay, so now we need to do the rest of the flow. So we need to go back to editing. And let's expand the apply to each one, and we need to start building out some actions now. So first of all, we need to be able to pull out that auth token. So to do that, we need to do another parse JSON. Okay, and it'll be the body of the HTTP request. So again, if we expand out here, it's this part of the body, but we're taking that as the content, but we want to use the parse JSON command to be able to pull out just the access token, the auth token itself. So this is what we need to do, as I mentioned earlier. So when we do generate from sample, and we're going to take this output here. So we're not actually going to use this specific token, but we're going to use these like these entries here, these parts of this JSON, what form this JSON, to be able to use these individual pieces as actual variables to pass into our flow. And in this instance, we're going to want to use this access token as a variable a little bit later. So we copy that, I'm going to paste it in here, click done, and there you go, that converts that piece, that example there that we pasted in there, as now this parse JSON piece, and now we can actually use these bits here as individual variables a bit later. So token type expires in, our access token, which is specifically what we'll be needing. Okay, and now we've got our access token, and now we need to create a new condition to allow us to choose between whether we are gathering the TVM score or the high severity alerts, because essentially we'll reuse the same flow for the other part of our Power Virtual Agent logic. So what is our condition? So if we need to take that answer variable that gets passed from the Power Virtual Agent. So that's here, and we want to check if it's equal to secure score, which is one of our, well, TVM score, which is one of our choices. I think in the documentation we use secure score, but I don't think that's strictly correct. So TVM score is the correct proper phrase we should be using. Okay, so that gives us our condition. So if that's a yes, then we go here, and if it's a no, then we'll do the high severity alerts. But in the first bit, we're doing the TVM score, so let's add some stuff in here. So now we need to do another HTTP GET request, and this is where we're going to actually call the API and pass that access token to it. So HTTP. Okay, and in this method, we're doing the GET method in here, and the URL. So this is a specific API URL. So let me just grab it. Oops, my clipboard didn't work there. Okay, so that's our URL even, and so this is the important bit. So, and this is where can be some issues with the copy and paste. Authorization, and we want to say bearer access token, so it needs to be bearer, and then we want to use the access token variable here. Okay, so we call request and we use that as our authorization. So now we want to, so when we call that back, we'll get some return in a JSON format, and so therefore we want to again use the parse JSON command to be able to use that and pass that back in a meaningful or useful way, rather than just passing back the full JSON. So we're going to use the body from the HTTP2 request, because it's HTTP2, so here, and we've already got a sample in the text, so rather than having to run a test and get that output, we've actually got one already, and we've already generated the schema from a sample, so this will give us it here. Oops, sorry, I got that wrong. We haven't done that. We have to use, we've stolen this from an output, so we can generate from a sample. And there you go, and that will give us the, so basically it gets split down, so we've got the score here, which is what we want for the exposure score. And And the TVM score is broken down into two components. We've got the exposure score and the configuration score. So we do repeat this process to gather that part of the score as well. So we do another HTTP request and hit another get. And the URI in this instance is the configuration score, the API. So let me just grab that. Boom. And then same authorization, and we want to pass that same access token again. So bearer, and then add in the access token. Yeah. And then again, that will provide us back a JSON, so we have to do parse JSON again. We take the body from HTTP3 and then generate from sample again and copy and paste the text from the documentation to save yourselves time. Done, and there you go. So then we've got the score variable again, which we can use a bit later. Okay, so now we want to create a string response. So we can pass everything back. So we're going to append to string variable. So this will append it to our variable that we've basically where we declared at the top of this flow. Append to string variable, and the name of that variable is our response, and then the value. Okay, so this is where we can start to use things. So we've got the customer name component of one of our JSONs here. So there it will say customer name, which we stored in that array, and we just pulled that out. And then we can use some text and say exposure score, and then we want the score from the relevant exposure score. So it's from HTTP2, so parse JSON free. Where's parse JSON free? Here, and we want the score from parse JSON free. And then we want to maybe do a pipe and do what's the configuration score? Configuration score. And again, we want to pull the score from JSON4. What's JSON4? It's here. Score there. So that's going to give us customer name, Contoso, exposure score is X, and then configuration score is Y. And then probably want a, I don't know, maybe a hyphen there, because remember what this will do then is repeat that for each loop. Okay, and then we just need to return that. So let's have a look. So in here we can do a quick test, and we want to do compose, and this will allow us to quickly just sort of test that value. So compose, and we use the response, which is slightly above, and we can just test this actual flow. So we can use a test, and we had a recent trigger, so we can use that one quickly and just run that. So it's just going through each customer. Okay, and we got failure on HTTP2, so that's good. Let's have a look at what's going on there. So if we expand this out, let's have a look. Normally an issue with authorization sanitized. So let me go and work that out. I'll come back. Okay, so worked out why there was an error there. Basically, there needs to be a space in between the bearer and access token. So let me just update this one here. There, space there. Okay, I can save that, and let's run the test again. So it runs through, and this time ran successfully, and we can just expand out our flow, and if we check the compose, we can see that here that what it's pumping out. So all looks good. So for the next entry, doing it for Toso and then Tailspin Toys, and then finally, if we do it on the final one, we can see here we have, and remember this is appending, so it basically just adds it to the string variable as each run through. So we've got Katoso, then we've got Tailspin Toys, and then we've got Northwind Traders. Which is good. I maybe want to tidy up this this append thing here so we don't have the hyphen coming on at the end. So I'll think about how I want to divide these up. So maybe a double pipe or something so it tidies it off nicely at the end, or just leave it a space there, or maybe have a hyphen between these, or a comma between those, and then a pipe between the customers. So let me just go and edit that in here. So let's maybe do a common there, and we can have a pipe at the end, so that will probably look a bit tidier. Save that. Okay, so what is next? So I guess now we just need to return something back. So we probably want to return that response back to the our virtual agent. So the response, and start our variable, which will be response. And we can actually remove this compose because that's just for us to check that it was what the contents of this variable is, but we don't need to check that anymore. So we can save this, and we can actually go back to our bot. Okay, so let's give it a go again in here. Let's just churn. So this, so look, so we want to just provide show message, and we want variable, and we want the answer, or it should be response actually. I think I just need to remove this one, just add it again, call an action, response, and then we should be able to get the response. There we go. Save that. Okay, so let's give it a whirl with our trigger phrase. TVM score. Now it's going to run through the flow and get that for me. And boom, there we go. We've got our Contoso score, Tailspin Toys score, and Northwind Traders score. Perfect, exactly where we want it. Okay, so I'm just going to close out. Now we'll finish part 2, and then in the final part, we'll do the other side of this condition. We'll do the call to the high severity alerts.